Sup, you dirty fucks. You know, people today talk a lot about oppression. Oppression by those damn whites. Patriarchal power structures deliberately trying to keep women down, trying to keep blacks down, Mexicans, gays, trans, cripples, fatties. Basically anyone who isn't white and straight and male. But then if that's the case, how can there be a black president of the United States? Or a black attorney general? Or armed forces general? Or UN secretary general? How could Ronda Rousey have been the highest paid UFC fighter when she was the women's bantamweight champion? A woman getting paid the most in a man's sport? That should be impossible. Maybe she sacrificed her ovaries to the patriarchy. But then, the world has seen women prime ministers. In Australia, twice in New Zealand, and even in the patriarchy headquarters in the UK. And back in the 80s as well, when I'm pretty sure just being a woman in public was illegal, right? I'm sure if you ask Judge Judy, she'll tell you exactly how difficult it was being a woman in a male-dominated profession.
You talk about law school, and I think it's interesting to note, because I think we're both feminists.
I never considered myself a feminist. All during my professional career, whether it be a lawyer or a judge, I never belonged to a woman's organization. I didn't want to be, I wasn't a woman lawyer. I was a lawyer who happened to be a woman, and I wasn't a woman judge. I was a judge who happened to be a woman. I actually never felt, probably I was too stupid to know that I was held back at any time because of my gender. And I still don't feel as if there was any time in my life when I thought that being a woman held me back. You define yourself. If you let other people define you, that's a mistake. So I never felt the need to have a feminine organization behind me, although I'm sure that in some way they were assistants to me along the way.
I think it's funny, I think of feminism as the social, political, and economic equality for men and women. So, I wish people would embrace the term, because I think it's gotten a bad rap. So obey the cube. It's interesting for me to hear you say it's almost like you don't want to be associated with feminism.
No, because I don't think a movement, actually, Katie, helped me. Being part of an organization never defined me.
So it's quite obvious that rich white Western women aren't oppressed. It's quite obvious that rich blacks aren't oppressed. Neither are rich gays, inspirational cripples, and for fuck's sake, in New Zealand, we even had a transsexual MP and mayor. On top of all that, if you look at all these white countries, you can see that they are literally littered with loads of poor, stupid, and disadvantaged white people. So what's clear is the white supremacist capitalist patriarchy narrative is obviously false. False. Yet people still feel like there's some sort of oppression going on. And people can point to many examples of it in terms of wealth distribution, treatment under the law, and access to resources. So what's the deal, yo? Well, the thing is, they're half right. There is a group of people who possess and wield institutional power, and it's the same group that's always been doing it. The only group distinction one needs to make is between the haves and the have-nots. Rich people and poor people. That's the way it is, and that's the way it's always been. The haves are a group of elites that are, for the most part, all related through shared genealogy.
Check out this family tree, done with research by Ancestry.com. Let me take you through this, branch by branch. Vice President Dick Cheney, the man who's only a heartbeat away from the presidency, is actually a blood relation. He's President Bush's 9th cousin once removed. Cheney's cousin Barack Obama is also Bush's 11th cousin and the 9th cousin of Brad Pitt. President Lincoln was President Bush's 7th cousin 5 times removed. And Bush shared more than just a ballot with John Kerry. That's right, they're 9th cousins twice removed. There's also royalty in the Bush bloodline. Princess Diana was Bush's 11th cousin twice removed. And then there's this bombshell. He is, after all, her 9th cousin 3 times removed. He's also related to Playboy founder Hugh Hefner, even Pocahontas, and Vlad the Impaler. Trace the family tree far enough, and you get Madonna, Celine Dion, and Tom Hanks.
They only intermarry with other elite families, and they keep their businesses and their affairs amongst themselves. These are all families that can be traced back to the Knights Templar, to European royalty and nobility, and back to the wealthy merchant class. And they even record their high status in publications like Burke's Peerage. All US presidents have been part of this group, and upon researching for this video, I've just found out that both Hillary Clinton and Trump are related as well.
Thomas Jefferson.
11-year-old Bridgeanne Davigno says she's made a first-of-its-kind discovery that President Obama and all the presidents before him, with the exception of one, are related and descendants of a former king of England.
But the idea is anyone's supposed to be able to become president, right? Well, no. Think again. It's the same scam that the rich have been playing over the poor for thousands of years. They manipulate and plan world events decades in advance, and they use whole generations as social experiments. Communism, fascism, monarchies, theocracy, they're all just different methods tested to see which is the most efficient at managing the masses. The only difference now in the West, with the experiment of democracy, is that we have the illusion of choice and fairness.
You get up on your little 21-inch screen and howl about America and democracy. There is no America. There is no democracy. There is only IBM and ITT and AT&T and DuPont, Dow, Union Carbide, and Exxon. Those are the nations of the world today.
We've been lied to since birth and fooled into thinking that the world is run by elected leaders and, that they make the laws for our benefit and that they operate within the law, they put away the bad guys, and that all world events are just happenstance.
False.
The world is a business.
We no longer live in a world of nations and ideologies, Mr. Beale. The world is a college of corporations, inexorably determined by the immutable bylaws of business. The world is a business, Mr. Beale. It has been since man crawled out of the slime. And our children will live, Mr. Beale, to see that perfect world.
It is a big idea, a new world order.
So that the problem of the Bush presidency will be the emergence of a new international order.
Within the next 4 years, we will see the emergence of a new international order.
The beginning. There's a need for a new world order, but it has different characteristics in different parts of the world.
It's about the future of Europe and a new world order.
Nu måste vi söka vägar framåt och hitta ett sätt för alla att leva tillsammans.
Det är dags att inse att nya svenskar kommer att ta plats.
Med kultur, språk och vanor.
Och det är dags att se det som en positiv kraft.
We are now facing a common challenge. And the challenge is how to build a world order for the first time in history on a global basis.
The affirmative task we have now is to actually create a new world order.
I think a new world order is emerging, and with it the foundations of a new and progressive era of international cooperation.
In which there's no war or famine, oppression or brutality.
A world where the United Nations, freed from Cold War stalemate, is poised to fulfill the historic vision of its founders.
Will be to develop an overall strategy for America in this period when really a new world order can be created. It's a great opportunity. It isn't just a crisis.
New World Order is the headline in the Globe and Mail in Canada.
Is this global governance at last? Is it one world, the central bankers in charge? But aren't we all just living and dying for what the central banks do?
Of course we are. We are absolutely slaves to central banks.
But in a globalized economy, we are going to have to take global responsibilities, and there is going to have to be some semblance of global governance.
One vast and ecumenical holding company for whom all men will work to serve a common profit, in which all men will hold a share of stock, all necessities provided, all anxieties tranquilized, all boredom amused.
So, in conclusion, ladies and gentlemen, a new world is emerging. It is a new world order with significantly different and radically new challenges.
When we are successful, and we will be, we have a real chance at this new world order, an order in which a credible United Nations can use its peacekeeping role to fulfill the promise and vision of the UN's founders.
Något nytt. Det nya landet.
The preceding announcement has been paid for by the New World Order.
So when the CIA overthrew the democratically elected Prime Minister Mossadegh in Iran in the 50s, it was because the Anglo-Iranian oil company didn't want the Iranian oil nationalized. It's the same when the British colonized India. It was the East India Trading Company on behalf of the Crown that was looking to exploit the natural resources so they could send goods like tea and opium and fucking spices back to Britain. And the Opium Wars in China were about the Crown forcing the Chinese to legalize opium and allowing them to sell it there, which they later would through the Hong Kong Shanghai Banking Corporation. Colonialism wasn't simply about territory. It was about what one can do with that territory, what resources they could extract, not about having land for the sake of it. So when confronted with the possibility or the prospect of a mass colluded sort of global cabal, most people inevitably say,
how could they keep something that big a secret? And how can they even coexist for that length of time?
Well, the thing is, they have a separate set of rules for themselves. They all compete for the biggest slices of the pie, but what they never tolerate is any of their members giving any of the pie to anyone else, or even letting anyone else bake their own. Like a mobster's poker game, they will protect the integrity of the game at all costs against outsiders. And the game, in its current form, is the production and consumption of consumer goods propped up by the US dollar, which is backed by other people's oil.
You have meddled with the primal forces of nature, Mr. Beale, and I won't have it. Is that clear? You think you merely stopped a business deal? That is not the case. The Arabs have taken billions of dollars out of this country, and now they must put it back. It is ebb and flow, tidal gravity. It is ecological balance. You are an old man who thinks in terms of nations and peoples. There are no nations. There are no peoples. There are no Russians. There are no Arabs. There are no third worlds. There is no West. There is only one holistic system of systems. One vast and immane, interwoven, interacting, multivariate, multinational dominion of dollars. Petrodollars, electrodollars, multi-dollars, Reichmarks, Rins, rubles, pounds, and shekels. It is the international system of currency which determines the totality of life on this planet. That is the natural order of things today. That is the atomic and subatomic and galactic structure of things today. And you have meddled with the primal forces of nature. And you will atone. Am I getting through to you, Mr. Beale?
The elites operate outside the paradigm of law and nation states and money, and that is because they are the creators and arbiters of that system, and that system is designed to manage us. They are the ones who decide which land masses become which nation states. They own and run the means of production by all being on overlapping boards of directors on all the major multinational corporations. They run the weapons industry, the drugs industry, both legal and illegal, and they also set up the allopathic medical system and the university education system.
But there's a reason. There's a reason. There's a reason for this. There's a reason education sucks, and it's the same reason that it will never, ever, ever be fixed. It's never going to get any better. Don't look for it. Be happy with what you got. Because the owners of this country don't want that. I'm talking about the real owners now. The real owners, the big wealthy business interests that control things and make all the important decisions. Forget the politicians. The politicians are put there to give you the idea that you have freedom of choice. You don't. You have no choice. You have owners. They own you. They own everything. They own all the important land. They own and control the corporations. They've long since bought and paid for the Senate, the Congress, the state houses, the city halls. They got the judges in their back pockets. And they own all the big media companies, so they control just about all of the news and information you get to hear. They got you by the balls. They spend billions of dollars every year lobbying to get what they want. Well, we know what they want. They want more for themselves and less for everybody else. But I'll tell you what they don't want. They don't want a population of citizens capable of critical thinking. They don't want well-informed, well-educated people capable of critical thinking. They're not interested in that. That doesn't help them. That's against their interest. That's right. They don't want people who are smart enough to sit around the kitchen table and figure out how badly they're getting fucked by a system that threw them overboard 30 fucking years ago. They don't want that. You know what they want? They want obedient workers. Obedient workers. People who are just smart enough to run the machines and do the paperwork and just dumb enough to passively accept all these increasingly shittier jobs with the lower pay, the longer hours, the reduced benefits, the end of overtime, and the vanishing pension that disappears the minute you go to collect it. And now they're coming for your Social Security money. They want your fucking retirement money. They want it back so they can give it to their criminal friends on Wall Street. And you know something? They'll get it. They'll get it all from you sooner or later because they own this fucking place. It's a big club, and you ain't in it. You and I are not in the big club. And by the way, it's the same big club they used to beat you over the head with all day long when they tell you what to believe. All day long, beating you over the head in their media, telling you what to believe, what to think, and what to buy. The table is tilted, folks. The game is rigged. And nobody seems to notice. Nobody seems to care. Good, honest, hard-working people, white collar, blue collar, doesn't matter what color shirt you have on. Good, honest, hard-working people continue. These are people of modest means. Continue to elect these rich cocksuckers who don't give a fuck about them. They don't give a fuck about you. They don't give a fuck about you. They don't care about you at all. At all. At all. Yeah. You know? And nobody seems to notice, nobody seems to care. That's what the owners count on, the fact that Americans will probably remain willfully ignorant of the big red, white, and blue dick that's being jammed up their assholes every day. Because the owners of this country know the truth. It's called the American dream, because you have to be asleep to believe it.
The have-nots can be divided into varying strata based on access to resources and creature comforts, or what the ruling class calls freedom, which is basically the freedom of choice of how to express oneself through which consumer products one buys, or through which brands one aligns themselves with.
The gold Apple Watch is a truly revolutionary product, but its most groundbreaking feature is that it allows you to communicate with unrivaled accuracy that you have $10,000.
What sets the gold Apple Watch apart from your average Rolex is that everyone knows exactly how much it costs. People will be like, holy shit, doesn't that thing cost $10,000? Then they'll know you have that much money.
Apple Watch comes in gold, steel, and aluminum. And because all three are functionally identical, the only difference between them is how much money you make. The gold Apple Watch, the best $10,000 you'll ever spend. Until 2 years from now when you'll need to buy another one.
And while there may be some within the higher strata of have-nots who achieve monetary success, the gulf between their wealth and influence and that of the haves is still astronomical.
People are talking a lot about inequality these days, about the fact that the richest 1% have so much more than everybody else. Let's start with this graph, a perfectly even distribution of wealth among all living people, with everyone divided into 5 equal groups. Now, let's show how much each group actually has. Shocking, right? 80% of the world's people barely have any wealth. It's hard to even see them on the charts. Meanwhile, the richest 2%, they have more wealth than half of the rest of the world. Let's look at this chart another way. The richest 300 people on Earth have the same wealth as the poorest 3 billion. So the number of people it takes to fill a mid-sized commercial aircraft have more wealth than the populations of India, China, the US, and Brazil combined.
So you might say,
So fucking what? Who cares if 85 people in the world have more wealth than 3.8 billion? It doesn't prove anything.
Well, you can argue over evidence and standards of proof all day, but let's be real here. There's never going to be 100% conclusive evidence that's going to satisfy all parties that's going to come from either side, and especially not on the internet. And what all debates on the subject usually boil down to is, I don't think they would do that. There are many reasons to take this position, from the implications being too terrifying to accept, all the way down to, I don't really know enough about it to make a comment or to make any kind of judgment, and that's fair. However, you don't need to simply stop there. We can still peel back a few layers of the onion. Like an investigator in a murder case with insufficient evidence, what they do is they look for things like suspects, past behavior, trends, motive, who benefits, and so on. Then they set up premises and see if they match the evidence at hand. For example, if it was suspect A, how would he have done it? Why would he have done it? So similarly, in this situation, we're in a position where we can at least determine the probability of whether this kind of mass collusion is possible, and it all depends on how you approach the subject. This is a concept that will be a central and recurring theme in a lot of my videos, and something that Robert Anton Wilson described as one's reality tunnel. That is, the lens through which one perceives the world. It is well known that if you can create conditions that limit the information available to someone when they're young, it'll shape their perception of what is and what isn't possible as an adult. If someone's a fundamentalist adherent to a particular religion, then you can logically deduce and predict to a certain degree of accuracy how they think about particular subjects and how they will react to certain situations. For example, if a boy was raised as a Muslim, right, and he was taught to believe that Islam is the best and the only religion in the world, and that the Prophet Muhammad was the best example for humanity to behold on the best way to conduct one's affairs. You taught him to believe this under penalty of death. Well then, when that same Muhammad character marries a girl when she is 6 years old and consummates the marriage when she's 9, then you can imagine that if given the situation, hashtag not all, but at least a sizable amount of Muslim men upon reaching adulthood would not hesitate to marry and consummate with a girl of the same age. His reality tunnel would be such that this is an acceptable act and one which is sanctioned by God, whereas someone who was raised in the secular egalitarian West, through our reality tunnel, this type of behavior is reprehensible, and we would call a person who engages in it a pedophile. And this person would be universally despised and often punished if caught. Another example is a person who has been indoctrinated by social justice propaganda will have a reality tunnel such that looks for anything that could vaguely be considered bigotry or hate speech, and then automatically assumes and infers that that was the intent of the person or the entity that produced whatever it is that they were observing. So how that relates to the subject is this. The mark of an educated mind is being able to hold a position in one's mind without accepting it. Being able to look at an event through a different perspective or a different reality tunnel. So as a thought exercise, let's take a look at certain world events through both the lens that the world is run by elected leaders, that they tell the truth, and that justice and the law prevails, which we'll call paradigm A, and through the lens that there has always been an overclass governing the population. It's the same way today, and that they are manipulating world events towards a specific goal, which we'll call paradigm B.
We've been spending most our lives living in a bankster's paradigm.
And we'll see which one best lines up with the facts.
Event number 1.
HSBC busted laundering drug money. Now, if you want the whole story, I suggest you read this article from the Rolling Stone called Gangster Banksters Too Big to Jail, which is appropriate, which is the most detailed account of the situation that I can find. However, it's a bit long, but the links are in the description. Anyway, the short version is HSBC first got sent a cease and desist letter from the US government for laundering money to shady individuals in 2003, and HSBC, they said they're on top of it. What actually was the case was that since then, they had laundered money to the tune of hundreds of trillions of dollars for Mexican drug cartels, organizations linked to Al-Qaeda and Hezbollah, Russian gangsters, and fucking several other different types of people. And continued to do it repeatedly despite receiving multiple warnings not to from 2003 to 2010. And when I say multiple warnings, there were over 30 sent in just 2005 alone. Former Senate investigator Jack Bloom said that they violated every goddamn law in the book, and they took every imaginable form of illegal and illicit business. So then in 2010, the government were fucking getting pretty serious and ready to put on their big boy pants, the big daddy pants, fucking straighten some shit out. So what they did is they sent another cease and desist letter, which HSBC also continued to violate until 2012, when there was finally an investigation. So to settle, HSBC, as a corporate entity, offered to cop to failing to detect dishonest practices and paid $1.9 billion in fines, which is about 5 weeks' profits. No management officials paid any kind of individual fines or faced any criminal penalties. The justification for that was, if they had faced criminal charges, then the bank would lose its license to operate in the States, which would then destabilize the world economy. Where have I heard that before? So, under paradigm A, drugs are illegal, supporting terror is illegal, and money laundering, especially to these types of fucking entities, is certainly illegal. So, under this paradigm, the bank should have its license suspended at the very least, and the guilty parties should be facing jail time. Just like this guy did. Did this happen?
No.
Oh, but they didn't know. You know, it was just a few bad apples. Can't really blame them for that, it's not their fault.
Well, if it had been one, or maybe even a few cases, you could make that argument. But this went on for a decade, and to the tune of hundreds of trillions of dollars. And considering that this bank started out as a fucking laundromat for drug money, I think it's pretty safe to assume that they knew exactly what they were doing. So then how does this look under paradigm B? Well, if there's an elite that run the money system and the banks and the drug trade, and if they're also above the law, then this is exactly the type of thing that you would expect to see happen in this situation. So which paradigm is consistent with the facts in this case?
Like snorting cocaine lines living in the bankster's paradigm.
Sure, whatever. I mean, that's just one case. I'm sure the banking system is founded on the right principles though, right?
Well, let's look at event number 2.
Event number 2.
The LIBOR scandal. LIBOR stands for the London Interbank Offered Rate, which is basically the rate at which banks agree to lend money to each other. Now, the prices for nearly every kind of financial instrument are pegged to this rate. So things like credit cards, mortgages, currencies, bonds, commercial loans, fucking just about everything. Just about everything. And this rate is calculated every day by the world's 16 largest banks, and they send in exchange rate numbers to the LIBOR panel in London, and they throw out the top 4 and the bottom 4, and then they average out the remaining 8 to get to the final exchange rate that they use for that day. Now, this is supposed to be because it makes it harder for the banks to create artificially high or low interest rates, because to cheat the system, a majority of the banks would need to be in collusion. And it turns out that they all were.
I think one of the most interesting things to hit the news this week is the LIBOR manipulation. I think we need to talk a little bit about this so that people understand the significance of it, because it hasn't really been widely appreciated by the public. Now, the LIBOR is not a real interest rate, it's a benchmark. It's a benchmark that is set privately by the banks and in secret. There's a committee of banks that does that. On the basis of the LIBOR, a whole host of other interest rates that are charged to people for their mortgages, the businesses, and so on, are determined. Now, the case and the fine imposed on RBS has found that actually RBS has been colluding with brokers and others to manipulate the LIBOR. There's a criminal dimension, and they've been charged. The British government...
Hang on one sec, just for people that haven't followed the story at all, just to get a little more on why this matters so much.
This matters enormously for a number of reasons. As I said to you, this is not a real interest rate; it's a benchmark. If the banks determine the benchmark in an untruthful way, then they can influence a whole host of other prices, and they can influence the receipts they make from people to whom they've lent money. And from the various transactions they make in the derivatives markets. For the banks, the ability to manipulate the LIBOR is a key mechanism to make extra profits, basically. And they've got this ability to do it because they set the LIBOR privately and in a special committee which they run themselves. Now, the British government is making out that this is a criminal act, which it is, of course, because collusion with the aim of making extra profits is criminal. The point is, however, and this is something that the British government wishes to keep quiet, it isn't simply criminality here. It looks as if the entire game is rigged from beginning to end. In other words, it isn't simply collusion and illegality. The game is rotten. And it is rotten for two reasons, I would argue. First, the banks have got an incentive to present falsely low rates because they, in this way, appear to be stronger than their competitors. And the banks have got an incentive to manipulate the rate, sometimes up, sometimes down, because they make different payments in this way on their derivatives portfolio. The banks then have got clear incentives to manipulate that, and they signal their incentives to each other. So this committee doesn't work. It doesn't work systematically in the public interest. It works in the interest of banks.
So let's look at it through paradigm A. If this is a fair system, then this should be impossible in the first place. And since it's highly illegal, all of the perpetrators should be facing criminal charges for one of the biggest financial crimes in history. Is this happening?
No!
In London on Wednesday, 5 of the 6 stockbrokers in the LIBOR case accused of helping convicted interest rate manipulator Tom Hayes were acquitted by a jury. Why did the jury decide to acquit these traders?
They were charged with conspiracy to defraud, and apparently the jury just didn't believe that they subjectively had entered into an agreement with this UBS trader, Tom Hayes, who is now serving, I guess the latest figure is 11 years. He's one of the few people who's actually been convicted for this rigging scandal, which involves one of the most important benchmark interest rate settings that we have. It sets the price for up to $450 trillion of securities around the planet. And 12 banks have already paid about $9 billion in fines regarding this rigging. But in terms of sending people to jail for this behavior, we've only sent one to jail, and the securities fraud prosecution in the UK just failed miserably.
Aha! So there you see, the banks are paying fines, and they got him. They got the guy who was doing it. See, there's a guy facing jail time. They got him. There's your guy. Paradigm A all the way.
Well, perhaps at a cursory glance, which is what most people give financial news, that might seem to be the case. However, what happens if we look a little bit deeper?
Now, he said during his trial that he had been transparent about trying to influence rates and that his managers were well aware of and condoned the trading methods which he employed, which were actually common industry practices. And Hayes said that at the time, LIBOR just simply was unregulated, and he believed that his requests for rate levels, it fell within this permissible range. And he even left a trail of emails and computer chats because he just didn't think that he was doing anything wrong. Now, during the trial, Hayes said, quote, "I was either the stupidest fraudster ever because I wrote everything down, or there was an element of me that genuinely didn't think about it." And also in documents shown in the courts, Hayes went on to say, "I might be a lot of things, but I am not stupid." So clearly he didn't necessarily think he was doing anything wrong.
Perhaps
that's whatever. It was probably just a few bad apples that had like a small ring going on, and they were actively just trying to make money for each other. That's all it was. It was just a few bad apples.
This is a fiction that these individual traders are themselves bad apples in great organizations. This is an institutional crime. The institutions involved should be held responsible, and there should be a corporate criminal statute that holds banks responsible for the failure to prevent this kind of activity. It's awfully hard to prove these kind of individual conspiracies against traders. They can argue that they knew nothing or that they were just leading this fellow astray. And really, it was a systems crime. It was something that could not have been. There were 45,000 or more trades involved here from 2006 2006 to 2010. Here we are 6 years later. Only one guy's gone to jail. The banks just take the fines and they pass along these fines to their customers or to the public at large. And there's not much behavior that's actually changed. So this is an example of the failure of the current regulatory system, where we rely on these kind of individual prosecutions, take a long time. But straining this out over time and not really putting responsibility on the institutions as opposed to these traders, lower level brokers in this case, is really a mistake.
All right, well, fucking maybe, all right then. Well, this is all the private banks that are doing it. So that doesn't really matter because the world's made up of nation states, right? So it's all about central banks. So maybe they can do something.
How did we get to a situation that a group of banks, most of them private, or maybe all of them privately owned, get to determine what is essentially the most influential rate in the globe? I mean, in theory, central banks are supposed to establish rates, I would have thought.
Central banks establish the rates at which they themselves lend to the banking system. However, there's also a private market for funds. There's the money market, and in the money market, banks interact with each other and work out the rate at which they lend to each other. This is the most important price in the financial system. It's more important than the rate at which central banks lend to banks. It's the most important financial price, and presumably in a neoliberal free market system such as the one we've got today, it ought to be set through the free competition among the financial institutions. It isn't, and that's the significance of this. This rate is actually manipulated. These banks, they've got a secretive committee. They work out a rate, which is the LIBOR. They don't transact at this rate. This is a benchmark, and they announce it on a daily basis. They manipulate it. They handle it, and by manipulate it, they affect all other actual interest rates at which people undertake the transactions.
Now, just to make this concrete for people, a city like Baltimore claims it's lost millions of dollars that could have been spent on schools or roads or housing or whatever, and they've lost this money, they claim, because of this fraudulently set LIBOR rate. But how does that work? Why is Baltimore out money because of what some bankers are doing on this committee?
Because the prices Baltimore would have been charged on various loans it took or on derivatives transactions it engaged in. I don't really know the particulars of the Baltimore case, but the prices it would have been charged and the rates it would have been charged would have been false. They would not have been true rates. They would have been based on the LIBOR. A premium would have been added to the LIBOR, and the LIBOR rate that would have been used as the base for this would have been a false manipulated rate. And by manipulating it, the banks would have seen to it that money would have gone into their coffers, that their profits would have gone up. It's a hidden, silent transfer of income and wealth from the public in general to the banks. It's arguably one of the biggest scams in the history of finance.
Fuck! Okay, how can I cling to this paradigm? Well, alright, maybe it wasn't just a few bad apples, but I'm sure the whole thing, the whole game, the whole system is, founded on, real free market ideals, which is the basis of what our whole economy is all about, It's a free market, so it's gotta be legit. Because if it's not legit, then
there's obviously outright criminality in some respects, because these banks have been proven to have colluded with one another to handle and manipulate the rate directly. But the point, I repeat, is that criminality aside, it looks as if the entire game is rigged, that the banks actually can know how to handle and manipulate the rate without actually directly colluding with each other. And that's what's wrong about it, and that's what's bad about it, because it shows that the so-called free market in finance simply doesn't work. I want to stress the importance of this, you see. Neoliberalism, free markets, which is the mantra that we've been listening to and hearing for decades, pivots on the banks and the financial system. This is where it's supposed to be free. This is the markets. These are the markets, and the institutions are supposed to be as free as possible. Well, they're not. They're actually managing this rate, manipulating this rate in their own interest, and they're doing it through a private meeting. Adam Smith wrote more than 2 centuries ago that when you let capitalists meet in a non-transparent way on a regular basis, then they will do two things. They will defraud the public and they will raise prices. He argued that 2 centuries ago. Well, there you are. When you let banks meet on a daily basis, privately, without transparency, without public scrutiny, what they will do is to manipulate this key rate, the fundamental rate of the financial market, to make extra profits. That's what they've been doing. This is one of the biggest scandals, as I said before, in the history of finance. It's about time the public realized what's happening and demanded intervention.
After he was implicated, former head of Barclays, Bob Diamond, said that there is an industry-wide problem coming out now. Industry-wide. Think about that for a second. So the very foundation on which our world capitalist monetary system is based is being manipulated by those who run it, and this is an industry-wide problem. So the next question should be, how long has this been the case? At least since fucking 2005. Or perhaps a better question might be, was it ever not the case? We only know now because information was leaked. So the implications of this are that the whole thing, the whole fucking system, everything is a fucking charade. This isn't something to just pass off and say, oh, fuck, I don't know enough about it. This is serious fucking business. So then, let's look at it under Paradigm B. So, if there was a rich elite that run the banks and are manipulating the money system, and they are above the law when caught red-handed doing it, then what would you expect to see happen in this situation? I don't know. How about parading around a sacrificial lamb to give the impression of accountability, all the while making no changes to the system and facing no real repercussions at the executive level? So which paradigm is consistent with the facts in this case?
Fiat money is based on lies, living in the bankster's paradigm.
Alright, whatever. If surely in America their sense of justice is better. If the president found out, he wouldn't let this shit happen. Remember Watergate? Sometimes the guys at the top, sometimes justice works,
Well, Nixon wasn't impeached, he resigned. And he was given a full presidential pardon later that year from Gerald Ford, making him immune to prosecution from any crimes that he may have committed. And surely under Paradigm A, this kind of scandal couldn't happen again, right? Well, that brings us to event number 3.
Event number 3.
The IranContra scandal.
In the 80s there was Cold War drama. We fought the commies inside Nicaragua. Our friends were the Contras, freedom was their mantra, so we sent them lots of money for guns and landmines. But Congress stopped the Contra money flow, just cause they moved a teeny bit of blow. But then a hero came forth, his name was Oliver North. He and Reagan went around the sissy Congress. Ollie North, Ollie North. You see, North secretly sold missiles to a harmless country called Iran that would always be a grateful ally. Then he gave the profits to the Contras. Genius! But the sales were uncovered by the press. Reagan and North began to stress, cause what they did was technically high treason. But it was totally justified. North volunteered to take the blame, to save Reagan from prison rape's shame. The truth he did bury with his hot secretary, thanks to her shredder. He got off totally scot-free. Ollie North, Ollie North. He's a soldier and a hero and a novelist, and now he's on Fox News.
So this was all made possible under a program called Continuity of Government, which was first set up in the 50s as an entity that would basically ensure that shit was still running smooth in the event of a doomsday scenario or if they had to suspend the Constitution for some reason. And thus, it was able to operate without any government oversight. So what happened was this continuity of government was used as a secret communications network for off-the-book projects. And they financed these operations with drug money from smuggling operations that they had been carrying out since at least the Vietnam War. And another reason that this was off the books was to provide people like the president with what's called plausible deniability. The idea being, if they don't know about it, then they can't be prosecuted for any wrongdoing. Now, whether Reagan knew the whole time or he didn't, I don't know. I assume that he did. But at minimum, when he found out, he lied about it to the public first. Then when the evidence became incontrovertible, Oliver North took the fall in the public trial, Bush and Reagan escaped any penalties, and then Oliver North was pardoned later and avoided prosecution.
Are you starting to see any patterns emerging?
So let's look at it through paradigm A. Drugs are illegal. Selling weapons to terrorists and rogue states is illegal, especially outside of congressional approval. So under this paradigm, number one, it shouldn't have been able to fucking happen. And number two, the perpetrators should be in jail. Is that what went down?
No! 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 No!
So then, how would it look under paradigm B? If there was an elite that runs the weapons and illegal drug trade, and if they're above the law when they're caught doing this, then this is exactly what you'd expect to see happen in this situation. So that's one more for paradigm B, for the bankster's paradigm.
We get drugs at a discount price living in the bankster's paradigm.
Alright, fucking whatever. If there is a global elite, doesn't that just mean that it is a white supremacist capitalist patriarchy? I mean, you're starting to sound like a fucking social justice warrior.
Well then, let's look at the final case, event number 4.
Event number 4.
The O.J. Simpson trial. If it was a white supremacist cabal, then a black man like O.J. Simpson could never escape prosecution for even having been accused of killing a rich, blonde-haired white woman. Everyone knows he did it, but he walked. Why? Why is that? You know why? Because he was rich and famous, and he could afford a good lawyer, and therefore could afford justice. I mean, that's the whole thing, right? That, you know, the whole reason why blacks were excited and were happy that he won, because finally a black guy got away with it when rich white people had been getting away with fucking shit for years. So blacks, they even know. Blacks know that the shit ain't fair, that the system's rigged. Obviously. But under social justice paradigm C, this event could not have happened. Doesn't make sense, you know? Can't have a black guy fucking killing a white woman in a fucking white supremacist fucking system. It's fucking cognitive dissonance central. You gotta be cray. You gotta be cray to believe that. So anyway, what about under paradigm B? If we look at it under the bankster's paradigm, if the legal system is run by the rich elites for their benefit, and then a rich and famous person escaping charges for murder is exactly what you'd expect to see happen in this fucking situation. So paradigm B is the one that fucking best fits the facts again.
We love crushing people's lives living in the bankster's paradigm.
So what you should do is try this thought exercise with other world events. or situations, like the 2007 financial crisis, the Iraq War, the response to Hurricane Katrina, or perhaps have a think about the reason why the most harmful drugs to the individual and to society are the ones that are legal. Or why fucking borderline poisonous food that's laden with addictive chemicals, that's often government subsidized, and vegetables are often prohibitively expensive, for poor people at least. I mean, how many events and situations around the world suddenly make a whole lot more fucking sense when you look at them through the bankster's paradigm? Pretty scary, right? But I'm sure it's just all a coincidence, because, you don't have to listen to me, because I'm just some fucking guy. See you cunts later.